You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Hey everybody, and welcome back to You're Free to Go. By now, you all know the purpose of our name. You know, you get pulled over for speeding. The cop says, I'm going to cut your brake. You're free to go. But what relates to me and Mark the most is when we finish a jury trial and get a not guilty verdict, and the judge turns to our client and says, you're free to go. So that's really the purpose of the name. All you listeners know that by now. But I was approached the other day, Mark, by a non-listener. He's never heard our podcast, and he had a funny story for me. He said, you know, I was scrolling through podcasts the other night, and I saw this, You're Free to Go. And he's like, oh, man, this is perfect for me. I'm going to tune in. And he's like, oh, it's not what I thought. The guy recently got divorced.
Oh.
So he thought, yeah, you're free to go. My divorce is official. I'm free to go. You know, and I started talking to him. I said, well, the truth is our name, and you and I have talked about this, our name can apply to a lot of things. So, for example, a buddy of mine bought me this hat. If anyone who's watching, it says you're free to golf, right?
Wow.
So they got me the hat with the free to golf on it. You know, we'll get one for Ben when he tries to start playing golf.
Well, I just
right?
got a license plate.
Yes, you
For
did.
one of my cars in California. It says you're free to go.
Exactly. So it's a really fun name. When, you know, I don't think when we came up with it, we intended it, but, you know, you're free to golf. You're free to shop. You know, you're free to do a lot of things. You're free to stay, right? So certainly while we're talking on this episode,
You're
our
free to
listeners
stay,
are free to
please.
stay. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a bunch of merch one day with all these
Right.
different, you're free to stay, you're free to go, you're free to golf and everything.
But it won't be free.
No, that's true. You got to pay. That's why we have sponsors. We just heard from Milburn, one of our sponsors. So now today is a little different. We often talk about our crazy ass cases. But today, I know you want to freeball it a little bit. You have an idea, a topic that occurs in the criminal justice system that we're just going to riff back and forth and banter about it for a while.
And during the course of this, I'm going to talk about some vignettes of some cases that apply, that fit right in. But the topic today is really something that is overwhelmingly prevalent, especially in the federal criminal justice system. And that's the topic of defendants cooperating with the government to get a lesser sentence. Because the reality is, in the federal criminal justice system, when you're charged with a crime, you've basically got three possibilities. One is you fight it and you go to trial. And if you're acquitted, wonderful. You're free to go.
Yeah, sure.
Your lawyer's a hero, and that's the end of the case. The second possibility is you plead guilty to the crime itself or to some charge that the government is willing to break it down to or work out, especially pre-indictment, before they've already put it in concrete in an indictment. And the third possibility, which is the prevalent one, it's the majority of cases now, is when a defendant agrees to cooperate with the government, what we call substantial assistance, helps them make a case or gives them information and helps them put together evidence against somebody else, jail somebody else, convict somebody else or many people.
Wait, are you talking about what I see in movies where someone goes undercover with wires underneath their clothes and they act like, and they get all this information?
Well, interesting you say that there are various ways that you can cooperate. And it works from the lowest level, where you get the least amount of bang for your buck, to the highest level. What you're talking about is the highest level.
No doubt, you're
And
putting
that's
yourself in harm's way.
That's reserved for just a very scant few, where really it's the only way to get into the criminal organization, like you see in some of these mob movies, and it has happened in real life, where the guy infiltrates the criminal organization and he's wearing some kind of listening device and transmitting device.
Yeah, I think it's a last resort for the police.
It's a last resort, and it's highly dangerous. Of course, if you're successful, the government asks for the least amount of time, and the judge, obviously recognizing the danger you put yourself in and your family, in that situation, you get the least sentence.
Right.
possible.
Yeah, and also the police and prosecutors realize you're not trained to do this. So, it's another reason why they're reluctant to put you in that position, other than the fact that it's not safe for you, but you're not
Well,
properly
you
trained.
remember one of the earliest stories I told about the client that was on trial for money laundering,
Yes.
and at the same time at night was trying to ferret out an attempt by some people to fix the jury. So he went undercover.
Yes.
And so he was facing danger. We didn't know what. And that is the highest form. Below that is if you go and testify in court against somebody. That's valued very highly. At the very bottom is if the government chooses to give you credit for it, and it's up to them. That's the problem you have. It's up to them, is when you just give information.
Right.
Information that may or may not lead to an arrest or a conviction, but they consider it vital enough that they'll give you credit. The problem in all these situations is there's no upfront deal.
Right. That's what I want you to answer this question that I get from clients all the time. I'm sure you do. How do I know I'm going to get a benefit? I will cooperate. I'm willing to cooperate, but how do I really know I'm going to get a benefit from cooperating?
And the simple answer is you don't know 100%. There's no way I can guarantee you. It comes down to reading what the prosecutor and the agent's saying, evaluating your client's information, what your client's going to do. But generally speaking, you are dealing with government prosecutors and agents who want the cooperation, because here's the other reality of the criminal justice system. So many cases are ultimately made and convictions are sealed by the fact that someone involved is cooperating.
Right.
So it's a two-way street. The government has a very, very high conviction rate. It's something like, it varies year to year, but well over 95%.
Right. Yeah.
And why? Because a lot of those cases, there are co-defendants, there are people who have become, as called in the vernacular, snitches.
Snitch.
All right?
A rat.
A snitch. And they wind up testifying or giving enough evidence that it helps the government convict. And sometimes, without that evidence, they can't even make a case. And there are some very interesting situations. For example, sometimes it sort of leads down a chain. For example, I had a client years ago who was a major drug dealer in Miami. And a couple of times representing him, we actually got not guilties, we got a probation sentence, everything worked out great.
What are you saying? Repeat? He was a repeat
He
offender.
was a repeat. He was
like an
His
annuity
whole
for your
family-
practice.
His whole family was involved. They literally had a block where just everybody lived, and they were running this large-scale drug operation. Well, eventually, he got a little too greedy, and he got caught, and the evidence was overwhelming against him. There was no way we were going to go to trial. He decided his best option was to cooperate. And one of the people he cooperated against was his former attorney, who, as it turns out, he had paid a lot of money in cash.
Right.
And that former attorney, turns out, was not reporting it on his income.
Right, so it actually had nothing to do with the crime he was arrested for. It was a completely different crime, and he's going to get credit for that with his prosecutor and before his court, that he's giving them information about a different crime that could lead to an arrest.
So what happens? The government goes to that attorney. They confront him with the evidence they have, which is overwhelming.
Wow.
And they give him an option. They had suspicions that he was a bag man for a number of the judges in Miami in county court, in circuit court, state court.
This had to be a while ago, right?
This was in the 80s, I believe.
Yeah.
And what happened is he wound up agreeing to cooperate, and he cooperated against a number of judges.
Wow.
And then these judges went down in something called Operation Courtroom.
Oh, okay.
So
of course, I remember.
from the cooperation of my client, it led ultimately to the downfall of a number of corrupt judges. So that's an example of how cooperation works for the government.
Right.
So, and for a defendant, you may think it's your only way out.
And by the way, one of the things I also tell them when they ask me, how can I trust this? This is crazy. There's no promises. There's no guarantees. I'm going to put out all this cooperation, and I don't even know what's going to benefit me. One of the things I say, in addition to what you just described, is that the system is built on this. So the prosecutors know that if they screw you over, there will be no other defendants or defense attorneys who will ever come forward and cooperate. The system will totally collapse if you cooperate and they don't give you a benefit. Because then again, this word will get out, and no other attorney will ever recommend that their client cooperate, or no defendant will ever decide to cooperate, because they'll say, oh, the government didn't hold up to their end of the bargain in that case. Why should I believe they're going to hold it up in my case? So I kind of say, really the system collapses if they don't honor this handshake agreement.
Right. And it's in writing, but what's in writing is that the government reserves the right to A, decide whether or not to give you cooperation credit, and B, how much cooperation credit to give you. And remember, because the federal system is built on the concept that the judge makes the final decision, you can't make a deal that binds the judge, except in very, very rare cases.
Yeah.
So for all practical purposes, what you do is you go in front of the court, you make recommendations. It's still, the judge can ignore your recommendation.
That's right.
So, for example, in the Rothstein Ponzi scheme case.
It's Scott Rothstein.
Right.
Yeah.
I recommended as defense attorney 30 years, expecting that he was going to get a big break later on from cooperation. Yeah. He'd already begun cooperating. The government recommended 40 years, and the judge gave him 50 years.
Right. This proves you at the end of the day, the man or woman wearing the robe makes the decisions.
Right. Of course, it didn't help that Scott was forging federal judges' signatures on orders.
I think the judge was, and all judges were very offended by that.
But putting that aside, so the point, to your point, is there's no guarantee, but it comes down to this: what are your options?
Right.
And you hope you're dealing with, people of good faith. And one of the exceptions that you can challenge the government's recommendation or decision not to give you cooperation credit is if you can prove that they're not acting in good faith. That's a very, very difficult thing to show and demonstrate. Right. It's rare that you'll be successful. Mm-hmm. It's happened, but it's rare that you'll be successful. I had one case where I had one district copy me on a letter where they accused the district that my client was in of not dealing with my client in good faith, because they weren't going to give my client any credit for all the cooperation he gave. So I went to the prosecutor. I said, okay, you want to play this game? I'm going to let the court know. I'm going to make this letter public.
Right.
He said, are you blackmailing me? I said, no, I'm extorting you. I said, but in this case, I think I'm right.
Only you can get away with that, Mark, for sure. By the way, I want to see if you agree with me or if you have additional information. When clients say to me, well, why is it set up this way, Guy? Like, why won't they tell me up front? And I explain, of course, the judge is really the ultimate decision. Sometimes not necessarily at the state. We're really focusing on federal, but at the state, often the judge isn't. They just agree with the prosecutor 99% of the time. But what I typically tell them, and tell me if you agree, tell our audience if you agree or if there's other reasons, I say to them that if you testify in this trial and you're as a cooperating witness for the government, and the defense gets an opportunity to cross-examine you, they're going to basically say, hey, your charges are being dropped, or your charges, instead of going to prison, you're going on probation, so because you cooperate with the government. So you would say anything they want because they gave you this huge break, and therefore you're going to be belly up, in bed with the government and do and say whatever they want you to say because you're getting this huge break, and that really affects the credibility of that witness.
Which is why you're exactly right, and that's why prosecutors will not give you an upfront guarantee.
Right.
And the cross-examination that you've just described usually results in that witness saying, I don't know what sentence I'm going to get. They haven't promised me yet.
Right. I could go to prison for many, many years, or I get probation, or anything in between. As I sit here today, I have no idea what my punishment is going to be.
And how true that is, I'm sure they have a concept, but nobody's promised them.
Correct.
And so and in fact, it's interesting because there's a jury instruction in federal court when you're dealing with witnesses who are cooperating with the government and are expecting to get a benefit. And here in the 11th Circuit, which covers Florida and certain other surrounding states, federal courts here, the instruction goes something like this. A witness who expects to receive or has been promised a benefit for their testimony must be viewed with greater care and caution than that of an ordinary witness. And I got into trouble once because during my opening statement, I repeated the jury instruction that the judge is going to give in this case, ladies and gentlemen, and I stuck on the witness box a caution sign.
Interesting.
The judge screamed at me, said, "Take that down, you're not allowed to do that."
Wow.
But I think that helped because it must have burned in the
It drew their
jury's
attention
mind.
to it,
And that
for
was
sure.
a case that wound up in an acquittal.
Wow, that's cool.
So,
Very
cool.
cool.
I got yelled at, but I won.
Right.
So in any event, getting back to what happens in cooperation, you're right. There's no promises up front. The biggest problem that exists is this. We have X number of federal districts around the country that are supervised by 11 circuit courts of appeal. Everywhere you go, the U.S. Attorney's offices there have different formulas and different ideas on how much to value cooperation.
Right.
So what happens is there's no uniformity. Even though there's supposed to be uniformity in the federal system, there isn't. So you could be in one district where the maximum they'll give you is 33% off what the guideline sentence is. Other districts, it could be 50% off. I've had sentences. I had a client in California who not only committed massive credit card fraud, he bribed an FBI agent who was on his payroll and a Homeland Security agent on his payroll.
Holy cow.
But he cooperated. He testified against both, gave a lot of cooperation, and he
Big.
wound up with a super light sentence.
Right. Yeah.
Now, here in Southern District of Florida, I guarantee you he wouldn't have gotten the same sentence because the U.S. Attorney's Office would have been stingier in what they offer as cooperation credit. And that's the problem. So you have to know your district, and you have to know your judge. And unfortunately, you can't pick your district most of the time.
Right.
And you can't pick your judge.
The government tries to do that a little bit, you know.
Sometimes.
Well, look at like the P. Diddy case. They could have taken it in California. They could have taken it in the Southern District of Florida or New York. And there's, I think, a reason they took it in New York. They thought they'd get a better jury, a better sentence.
Right.
But
And
so
sometimes when there are multiple districts involved, they can decide where to take it.
Right, but that's the government, not the defense. I wish we got that choice.
So let's assume you're cooperating. Let's assume that you're providing valuable information against the co-defendant. Let's assume you're even going to testify against the co-defendant or other people who are committing other crimes. It's not just limited to your case. You can tell them about other crimes that are being committed. You can give them information to prevent future crimes. In fact, the only problem is the federal government's got to act on it. I had a fellow, he was a Polish national, who got caught up in a identity theft, counterfeiting credit card fraud case, was arrested in Monroe, Louisiana.
Oh, I've been there. Yeah.
Okay, and it was, I think, it was a real eye-opener for me. I actually loved the food. The food was
Right.
fabulous, and the people,
Southern cooking.
people were wonderful. But the prison or the jail he was held at, the mosquitoes were the size of eagles.
Brutal. Yeah.
It was brutal, and it
Yeah.
was hot and humid. And he had information about stuff that was going on right now. He was such a valuable asset to the government that they could have stopped millions of dollars of credit card fraud and identity theft just on the information he had. It was current. The problem is, no agent was ever able to get out there to interview him.
Oh, no. In Louisiana.
In Louisiana, I don't know what was going on administratively. You know, it wasn't any particular agent's fault. It was a manpower issue. It was the opportunity issue. I mean, during COVID, we had lots of situations where people couldn't jump on debriefings, is what we call them, of defendants to get information. But
So he didn't get any benefit. 'Cause
He got a minor
Right.
benefit for some of the information he gave in his case.
Well, you know what it reminds me of in that situation? It reminded me of something a little different, but I've had clients, it could be a doctor, it could be a school teacher, it could be just everyday mom and pop person who develops an addiction, let's say to pain pills. Otherwise, they're living a really law-abiding, productive life. They get addicted to pain pills. They buy some pills on the street from an undercover cop. They get arrested. And then the conversation of cooperation comes up, and they say to me, what do I have to cooperate? I'm not a drug dealer. I'm not, selling illegal, stolen goods. I have an addiction. I bought some drugs from the street. That's the extent of my knowledge of anything illegal going on out there. So the irony to me, cooperation is usually goes to the benefit. It errs to the benefit of someone who's more involved in criminal
And that is
enterprise.
It's interesting you say that. The people who are least involved in crimes, the people who are pretty much on the sidelines,
They don't get
the
this
people who do
benefit.
stuff that only involves themselves. The bottom line is they lose out on the cooperation
Right.
spectrum. The cooperation, I like to call it spectrum,
Right.
because there's something sort of diseased about it.
Right.
But the cooperation spectrum values most the worst of the worst. Perfect example, Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Of course.
Sammy the Bull Gravano admitted to, I don't remember the number, whether it was 9, 10, 11 or more murders while he was, the right hand of John Gotti. But the government had already lost several cases against John Gotti. He was becoming a public hero. They called him the Teflon Don.
Teflon Don, that's right.
So what happened is they managed to turn Sammy the Bull Gravano against John Gotti. And Sammy testified against him, and that was the case that Gotti was convicted on. And then he went to jail and eventually died in jail. Sammy was not prosecuted for those murders. Sammy instead became a member of the Federal Witness Protection Program, more appropriately called technically WITSEC.
Right.
And Sammy was sent, I don't know if it was Arizona, somewhere it was like the movie My Blue Heaven with Steve Martin.
Yeah.
It was a great movie.
For all we know, our engineer Ben could be
Right,
Sammy,
right,
right? We don't know. He's
Under an assumed name or
yeah,
whatever.
this is his.
Oh, no, they got me.
Yeah, they
oh,
got you.
no.
Of course, what happened is, and so Sammy escaped prosecution for the most horrific of crimes because that's how much the government wanted him. So the worst of the worst gets the best of the best deal because they needed him to take down John Gotti.
I know, and I always feel bad for those individuals who have no criminal history whatsoever. They're not involved in any criminal conspiracy, but it was a good person that had a bad day, got caught, and now they have no way to help out because they're just not in that world of crime. So
does the system stink? Yes.
Right, it does.
Does it work? Yes, it works for the government and it works for the defendants.
Right. And the government would say, we're sorry about that for that particular defendant, but what we're allowed to do through this cooperation, or what it enables us to do, is make additional arrests, get additional, as they say, bad guys off the streets. So, but before we go a little further on this, because it's a great topic, I think we should probably hear from one of our sponsors. What do you think?
Okay,
I think
let's
that's
do
a
it.
great idea.
You're Free to Go is sponsored by Lang Realty, South Florida's premier residential real estate broker. Whether you're buying, selling, or renting a home or condo, Lang's experienced realtors are standing by ready to help you. Contact one of Lang's top realtors today at 561-703-2427. Mark, I know you've got to have some good stories on cooperation, so share them with our audience.
Well, consistent with Sammy the Bull's situation, turns out, it's not atypical that these people who are used to a life of crime and now they get the benefit of cooperating with the government and getting a reduced sentence or no sentence or whatever, they fall back into their old habits.
Right.
So I believe what happened is Sammy got into trouble for some stuff that he did, and it typically happens. I have a great story. Years ago, I represented a guy. I was involved in the representation with a group of lawyers of a guy who had originally been a big-time Wall Street con man. Actually wrote a book about it. And while he was committing all of these frauds on Wall Street, he was actually doing some of them with the cooperation and the involvement of the New York mob.
Right.
So he was involved in a lot of nefarious stuff. And when he finally got caught, he had decided his only way out was to cooperate against the mobsters that were behind him, that were backing him, he was involved with. And so he did so. He joined the witness protection program, was given a new name, a new identity, a new place to live. And then, lo and behold, what does he do after a couple of years of this? He decides, I want to make some more money.
Right.
Because, living for those people, you don't make money living a straight life.
Correct. They were making a lot more money when they were committing the crime.
So what does he do? He gets involved with the mob again. Now, you would think that's an impossibility, right?
That the mob would.
Because you think
they have the scarlet letter. Mob.
not only the scarlet letter, but the danger involved.
True.
Once you reveal who you really are again and they can find you, usually that's curtains.
Yes.
Okay? But in this case, he actually got involved with a different crime family.
Oh, different family.
And even though the idea of loyalty and omerta and all of that should apply across the board, I guess these people were more interested in making money than enforcing the code. But I'm sure they kept a good eye on him.
Right.
So what happens, he gets involved and he goes right back to what he's doing with pretty much the same type of people, with the mob.
Amazing.
And of course, what happens? He gets caught again.
And he's doing that while he's in witness protection.
While he's in witness protection program.
Right.
And the thing is, here's the deal about cooperation. Two things. Number one, if you are asked to tell information about what you know, you got to tell everything. You can't be just a little bit pregnant. You got to tell everything, and you can't protect anybody. That's the biggest problem I find. A lot of my clients say, well, I don't want to talk about my brother. I don't want to talk about this one. I don't want to talk about that one. And then I say, well, then your choice is don't talk.
Yeah. I tell the clients you have to be fully transparent. You can't hold anything back. I also tell them if you do hold back, the government's going to know you're holding back.
Right. Now, sometimes I'll able to get an agreement from the government up front. Look, he's going to talk about his brother. He's going to talk about his cousin. Some instances, he's going to have to talk about his wife or his girlfriend, or if it's a woman, talk about the husband or boyfriend or whatever. But I want an upfront understanding, an agreement that you're not going to screw me on, that you're not going to go after them. Sure. And then he's free to say whatever he wants to say. But you can't be a little pregnant. That's number one. Number two, you can't double deal.
Right.
And that's what my guy that I just
He's
mentioned
doing.
is. You can't be a cooperating witness now in the witness protection program, or not necessarily in the witness protection program, but still having cooperated, and I'll explain that in a minute, and then turn around and commit more crimes. Or while you're cooperating with the government and testifying, commit more crimes. You don't know the number of cases I've had where I know that there's going to be these people testifying against my client who were involved in the fraudulent deal or the drug deal or whatever it was, in the conspiracy. And it turns out I find out from other sources through my investigators or somewhere else that turns out that, in fact, while they were working with one U.S. Attorney's office and one set of FBI agents or DEA agents, they're in another district committing crimes.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't even know.
Yep. But if they find out, they get
find
very
out.
angry.
And oh my God, it's
Really.
better not to tell them sometimes and spring it on them when they testify. In that situation, the government winds up disavowing them in terms of any deal.
Right.
And they rip up the deal. So you can't double deal, and it happens all the time. I had a client once who was a Cuban American in Miami involved in a big drug conspiracy case. And he was cooperating with the government. And then one day I get a call from the DEA agent saying, I'll make up a name, where's Felipe? Mm-hmm. I said, I don't know. I thought you guys were in constant contact with him. He says, well, we can't reach him. His phone's been turned off. We went to where he was living. There's nobody there. What happened? And I do the same. I call. I send somebody out to visit him.
You don't find them.
he is 4 sheets to the wind,
Uh-huh.
what we used to call a Colombian severance.
Yeah.
And it turns out, where is he? We find out in Venezuela. Why is he in Venezuela? Because we're doing these big drug deals that went back and forth from Venezuela to the United States
Right.
through Puerto Rico, and he got caught.
So he got caught in Venezuela?
Got caught in Venezuela.
Wow, yeah.
Now he's in Venezuela. Now, Venezuela doesn't want to give him back to the United States because they want to prosecute him there. And one of the reasons they want to prosecute him there, he had information there about public corruption. Apparently, he was dealing with somebody in the government.
Oh, sure.
So he was getting free passage into the country through whomever. And so I wasn't involved in that cooperation. So what
So
happened
he's cooperating with Venezuela on that arrest?
on that arrest?
And he was cooperating
But he's
previously.
committing crimes in the U.S. So the
Right.
U.S. decides, number one, we're declaring him a fugitive, naturally,
Yeah.
because his case hadn't been fully resolved. He skipped bond. And number two, if he ever gets back here, he gets no cooperation
deal.
credit. And I said, but wait a second. If he's cooperating in Venezuela, and at the time Venezuela was an ally of the U.S., this was before Chavez.
Yeah.
I said, if he's cooperating in Venezuela and helping out Venezuela, shouldn't he get credit here in the U.S.? And they said, well, we're going to decide that if he ever is back here. Well, as of today, he's still in Venezuela.
Oh,
And I doubt very much
he's
in
ever
jail.
coming back? Yeah.
I doubt he's in jail. I'm sure he's living however he's living, although it's not the place I'd want to be.
Right.
So it's crazy. Now, of course, there are ways that you can screw up by not only committing other crimes, you can screw up by giving the government false
Right.
information.
Lying to them. And
Lying to
yeah.
them,
Yeah.
not giving information about people and protecting people,
Right.
or giving information that, according to the government, is not accurate, accusing other people.
Right. So a lot of times the government already knows before your client cooperates. They know everything, but they need that witness to actually help them prove the case. They know what happened, but it's like a puzzle for the government. They have to put every piece of a puzzle together and to present it in the courtroom in a trial. And your client who's cooperating can be that piece of the puzzle. So that's how sometimes they know if your client's telling the truth or lying to them, because they really do know everything already. They just need that person that can testify to it in the courtroom and fill that piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you could provide amazing amount of cooperation, result in the arrest and conviction of many people. But if you wind up lying and they catch you lying, they have the right in their agreement, in their written agreement, to rip up the cooperation,
yeah.
and you get no credit. So that's exactly what happened to Scott Rothstein. As I said, we were all expecting that he was going to provide a vast amount of information to the government. It was going to actually it resulted in the arrest charging like 27 people.
That's
which is
significant.
massive.
Yeah.
Okay? It was many years of debriefing. Scott cooperated in the civil cases. As a result of Scott's cooperation in the civil cases, it's the only large-scale Ponzi scheme in U.S. history where all the money was recovered and given back to the investors,
Wow.
the victims.
And that was over $1 billion, right?
It was an enormous amount of money.
Yeah. Mhm.
So what happened is the government first discovered that Scott was involved, and this is what they alleged, involved with his wife in hiding assets that were supposed to be turned over, specifically jewelry. As it turns out, there was a yellow canary diamond worth well over $1 million that was supposed to be turned over, that the claim was that it had sold before the case broke.
So basically, the government's saying to you as his attorney, hey, we need these assets, we need these items back. And your client is saying, I don't have those anymore.
Right,
Is that
in
what
that
you're saying?
particular case.
Okay.
And what happened is he turned over a vast amount. I think it was estimated to be about $55 million worth of assets between the house, the boat, cars. He had like 9 supercars at one point, or 9 cars. Jewelry. I went to the home, this vast home in Harbor Beach, and inventoried with government stuff that was there. Mm-hmm. He had an enormous amount of high-end watches. She had jewelry. There was wine. He had hundreds of suits
Right.
Half of them not even worn. And they were all expensive. Everything, high-end, expensive items that ultimately were turned over to the government because the position the government took was these were all purchased with money from the Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
they were forfeitable is what we
right.
call it.
And I wasn't involved in that case other than as a spectator reading the news and so forth. That was your case. But I knew him, as we've mentioned before, when you taught at law school, trial advocacy, and he taught as well.
Well, he had been a student of mine when I taught.
Yeah, and then he started teaching, so I
Right.
knew
I
him.
was long gone. I'm much older.
He actually was one of my teachers, and I thought he was amazingly brilliant.
He was a brilliant lawyer
Yeah.
who just, unfortunately,
Yeah.
well, we could go for weeks talking about the
Right,
case.
but I followed what you were talking about, the yellow canary, and if I recall correctly, he said it was sold, and it turned out that his wife, or maybe it was an ex-wife, I forget, and with a lawyer, pawned it. So tell us what
Well,
happened.
this is what's interesting.
Well, real quick, before you guys go in, I have a question for you,
Sure.
just to kind of go on. So, with all of these accessories and all these assets that the government needs, how, like, if you miss something, do you get in trouble for that?
If it's an innocent mistake, no. But if it's something where it's clear, and I'll tell you the story and prove why it's clear that you're hiding it.
Okay,
You
all right,
claim
all
it
right.
didn't exist, and then you turn around and sell it somewhere. So what happened is the wife decided to sell it, even though it was claimed that it didn't exist anymore in their possession. And this was one of the most valuable pieces of jewelry that she had. And all right, you figure if she's going to sell it, hiding it from the government, you sell it halfway across the world.
Right.
Right? Instead, she sold it to a local jeweler store. Actually, didn't even sell it yet. Brought it there through a friend, an intermediary, through this jewelry store. And the intermediary brings it there. And what does the jewelry store do? They send it up to New York to the GIA, Gemological Institute of America, for grading. Because a stone of that value, before you're going to sell it, of that size, was enormous. I forget how many carats, but it was large. Before you sell it, you want to have all the paperwork, all the, the clarity, the color,
Cut.
the grade, the cut, all
Yeah.
the things
The
that
weight.
are, I think the 4 C's they call it.
Exactly.
And I think what happened is, I don't remember exactly, but I believe what happened, it had one of those little microchips in
Yeah,
it,
the really big, expensive diamonds have
Yeah.
microchips in them now.
and it got identified on a registry. Somehow the government found out, and they go to the jewelry store, to the jeweler. And of course, the jeweler's first position was, hey, it was just a person come off the street. We took it in, we filled out a receipt, and then we sent it up for grading. Well, turns out when the government got a hold of the receipt, it had the information, didn't have any address, didn't have any anything other than the phone number and the first name of the person,
Wow.
which would indicate that you knew that person.
Right.
So actually, the jeweler wound up getting prosecuted. She got prosecuted. The lawyer that was involved with her, a young guy, very nice kid, who wound up, was involved in turns out, other pieces that the wife sold and got the money through her in the lawyer's trust account. So it was a big mess.
Right, he got prosecuted too, I think.
He got prosecuted too. So the wife gets prosecuted, the friend gets prosecuted, lawyer gets prosecuted, and the jeweler gets prosecuted. And what happens is the government says, I don't know about Scott, about your cooperation.
Exactly.
But they didn't rip up the agreement right there and then. I kept talking to the three amigos. That's what I called the prosecutors in the case, the three amigos. And I kept talking to them, trying to hold them off from ripping up the agreement while his cooperation's going on. And then ultimately they decided he lied to them. They claimed that he lied to them about the somebody involved at a bank. And they had some supposedly independent evidence for that. And they went and asked the court to deny the motion they had already filed to reduce the sentence. They asked the court to rip it up, basically.
Right.
I fought that. The court ruled for the government. I appealed it to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. They affirmed the district court, meaning they agreed with the district court, without a written opinion. And then I went to the Supreme Court of the United States,
The High Court.
the High Court,
Yeah.
and they denied even hearing the case. So the moral of the story is, if you cooperate with the government, keep your skirts clean, don't do anything they can accuse you of that they can prove, and don't double deal.
Right, you're all in with that. You know, I'm sure you've had this experience. So many times I've gone with someone who decides that a client who's going to cooperate, and we go to meet with the government, and they call it maybe a proffer, and there'll be a queen for a day agreement, which says, you know, whatever you tell us today, it's very detailed, but, you know, we won't necessarily use it against you, and there's some exceptions, of course, but so often in those meetings, and I tell them, I say, the government knows everything, so you have to be honest. We'll be 10 minutes into the meeting. The 2 prosecutors there, or 3 prosecutors and an agent, whoever's in the room working for the government, they'll throw their notepad on the table. They'll step up and be like, this is over. Your guy's lying to us left and right. Don't waste our time. We're out of here. It's happened so many times, even when you tell your client over and over and over before the meeting, you must be honest. They will know if you're lying. And if you lie, the deal's over. And then what they usually say is, all right, go in the hall, talk to your client, get him to straighten out his act, and we'll give you one more chance. And usually they straighten out 2 or 3 times during the proffer, during this interview or cooperation meeting with the government, where they lie, and the prosecutor's like, we're done here. I have to go in the hall again with my client, talk to them, and come back. And you know, but I think sometimes, especially in white-collar crimes, it's the mentality, the psychology of our client that thinks they're the smartest person in the room, that they can get away with everything, that they're going to, you know, manipulate the situation and get away with it. But eventually, they usually come around and realize, oh boy, these guys are serious. If I continue to lie, I'm toast. But it happens a lot when we do these cooperation
Right, and the problem is, and I mentioned, I think it was yesterday when we were forecasting that we were going to talk about this, that cooperating, you know, a client, for me as a lawyer, I feel like a eunuch at an orgy.
Yes, you said that.
Because you lose control of the situation. It's really up to your client and up to the government. And you can, from time to time, take them out of the room, slap them around a little, and say, hey, buddy, you know, you're about to screw it all up. And the problem is, once you begin cooperating, once you agree to talk to the government and admit your involvement in the crime and talk about what other people do or did in that particular case, it's a one-way street with no exits. You can't turn around at the end of it and say, you know what, I'm going to trial, I'm pleading not guilty. Because you haven't pled guilty yet. That's the next step. First, they're evaluating whether or not to make a deal with you. So they're holding all the cards. So if your client's going to screw around, you got to tell them, don't bother. It's like I said, you can't be a little bit pregnant. And that's the problem. The way the system works, it's heavily weighted in favor of the government. And maybe rightfully so, but that's where it's at.
Why don't you share with our viewers a little bit about that? Is it Queen for a Day agreement? That's kind of or
it's
pass
funny.
cigar letter.
Queen for a Day. You know where that term comes from?
Tell us.
Because of my age, I remember the TV show, but hardly anybody knows. In fact, most prosecutors that I ask them, when they say, all right, we're going to send you a Queen for a Day agreement for you and your client to look at, I say, do you know where that term came from? They have no idea. There was a television show, I believe it was in the 50s. It may have even been in the 60s, but it was a really kitschy show. And basically what you had was a studio audience. And back then, the men were all wearing, you know, suits and shirts and ties, and mostly older people. And you had 3 women, basically, and if I remember the show correctly, because I was a young child at the time, and they would tell their story of woe. And the audience would decide who they're going to make queen for a day. And then the way that the person won, you had this like fake meter on TV, and the clapping would then decide who won. And the meter would show, oh, they had the biggest amount of clapping.
Right.
And then what would happen is, all of a sudden, they put a crown on her. It's like Miss America
Right.
used to be. And they bring in the washing machine she won, and everything else, and the dryer, and the appliances, and
Right, I'm gonna Google that
whatever, and the year's supply of whatever, KFC or whatever it was.
Right.
And that was queen. She was queen for a day.
All right. Yeah.
Now, how that applies to this, it's kind of not quite a good, accurate description.
Yeah, but that's what the clients on the street hear about, and they say, "Hey, can you get me a queen for the day agreement?"
Right.
I think the case it's actually called Castigar. Is that?
Well, Castigar is involved in
Right.
that, but that's a little too detailed. We don't want to, get our viewers down a rabbit hole here.
Right.
But actually, more appropriately, they call it a proffer agreement.
Right.
The client is proffering information. But it's a fascinating topic. We will be able to talk about it more in connection with specific cases.
Sure.
But we wanted to give our audience a little bit of information about it.
Yeah, and I did want to say one other thing too, because we did address how if someone's going undercover, how it really is a danger to themselves and to their family and so forth. But even if you're not actually going undercover with a wire underneath your shirt, but you're just cooperating, giving testimony to the government that they're then going to possibly use at trial, or they wind up using at trial. There's a lot of fear and concern there as well, and the clients will often say, is the defendant, if I'm a co-defendant, I'm going to testify against another, are they going to find out that I did this? Am I going to have to testify in court? How can the government protect me? I want protection, and unfortunately, there's really no way for the government to, protect somebody.
Well, the protection, here's the reality, and I did a little research on this. Turns out that the government tries to keep statistics on the percentage of cases where there are actual threats, and then the percentage of cases that there's harm. But the sample of people that they use in the study is very small. So I don't really trust those statistics.
Sure.
Basically, those statistics, even though I don't think they're valid, showed in the vast number of cases, there are very few threats and more often less actual harm.
Right.
But it also depends on who you're cooperating against.
Exactly.
And that's why the government has the Federal Witness Protection Program, what I called WITSEC. And in that scenario, if you are, in their judgment, in danger of harm, in danger of reprisal against you or your family, they will admit you into the program. It's based on the prosecutor's evaluation. And then what happens is there are two types of that program. There's what people typically see, the Sammy Gravano, the Steve Martin, My Blue Heaven, where you're not prosecuted, you're given new identity, and you're living somewhere else. Everybody's under an assumed identity, and you have a whole new life.
Right.
Okay? That's one way. The other way is when the government is going to prosecute you anyway, but they're going to put you in a WITSEC facility. This is what happened with Rothstein. A WITSEC facility that nobody knows where you are. Right. You're not on the federal prison locator system. You're under an assumed name, and you're in with other people who are also under the same circumstances. Now, the first question you ask yourself is, well, what protects you from those other people ratting you out and telling somebody out there that, hey, I'm in with so-and-so?
Right.
Well, what protects you is if that happens, and they can trace it to that person's taken out of the program and put back into general population.
Right.
And you know what the problem is? He doesn't have a backstory of where he's been, and he winds up being in danger as being labeled a rat,
right? Because they were
usually rubbed out in that general population. Right. So everybody is incentivized to keep the anonymity,
right?
Keep the confidentiality.
But the ones that don't rise to the level, they cooperate, but not to the level where they're eligible for witness protection. The problem is if they go to trial or if they get a deposition, opposing counsel, if they're a good defense attorney, they're going to figure out who that cooperator was, and they just have to understand. The client has to understand that yes, they will know that you cooperated.
There are a lot of considerations that involve in that, and those are you try to tell your client, give them what I call the smorgasbord of possibilities
yeah.
and let them choose which dish they want to take.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes they'll say, well, what do you recommend? And it's hard to really recommend, but you point out the ups and downs,
Right.
the positives, the negatives, the risk reward. And when you do that and they can clearly see it, they make the decision. And the reality is most people decide to cooperate. For me, I'm not personally happy because I like to try cases. I'm a trial lawyer.
Yeah.
I like to fight the government. I've had somewhere in excess of 250, 275 trials all over the United States. I still love getting into the courtroom
Right.
and fighting.
I always say it's like a football player playing in the Super Bowl. That's when I see when we're in that courtroom and trial, it's our Super Bowl.
That's right.
We love it. So, you know, you're right. We're going to talk about cooperation as we talk about other cases in future episodes, because there are cases where we worked cooperation. So it'll come up more. It's a great topic. I'm glad you picked it for today. Hopefully our viewers enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed it. And I see Ben's really over there enjoying it too. I think he was taking some notes actually.
Is he cooperating against somebody?
Yeah, he might be. I'm telling you. So, but I guess for now, you know, we're done for
We're
today.
done. So until the next time, ladies and gentlemen,
You're free to go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronston and Mark Nurek and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.